I'm here today with Mike Rener. Mike just finished giving us a great presentation called Shifting Sights, How Outward Mindset Creates Lasting Solutions. It's a bit of a mouthful. Sorry, I'm going to trip over that a few times, Mike. Thank you so much for the presentation. I've brought a few questions that we received from the audience both before and during your presentation. I wanted to take a few minutes to present those to you and get your insights, get some feedback for our wonderful attendees of these webinars. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in if that's okay with you. First, from the audience today, how do we balance our basic personal needs with the outward mindset so that we don't burn ourselves out?
Yes, Sarah, it's a question that we've heard in different forms before, and it's come up because I think at certain levels we've experienced that, and yet even in the question, there are some things to parse out for us to even consider what might be happening in our lives just in seeing what requires that question. And so for one key point is that there are basic needs that we all have, right? There are things, like for instance, at work, there are things that I have to accomplish. Having an outward mindset does not mean I abandon all of those responsibilities and just focus on what other people are trying to do. It's just like at home. As a parent or as a spouse, as a son or as a sibling, there are certain responsibilities, even as a neighbor, right? There are responsibilities that we have that we need to make sure there are certain things that I've got to accomplish. Like for instance, I might have to go to work even to be able to help provide for my family. But if my children's main objective that day is to have dad stay home, well, being outward mindset doesn't mean that then I don't go to work and I stay home with the kids, right? So there's certainly this need that we have certain objectives and things that we're trying to achieve individually. And I just wanted to make sure that we don't have a misconception around what outward mindset means, because outward mindset does not mean we abandon those responsibilities. It means that we now focus on doing them in a way that actually takes into account those that I impact around me. It gives me a fuller view of really what responsibility requires in multiple directions. Right? So that's maybe part one of that question. But to address the burnout piece, it's interesting because there is an inward mindset style that doesn't mind being burned out. In fact, it's the kind of style that is the I need to be seen as caring. I need to be seen as in response to others. I need to be seen as not having my own agenda. I need to be seen as making sure I'm attending and caring for other people. There's even a crazy one, which is I need to be seen as being outward, right? And we feel like now we are now invested in a project that is less about helping others, and it is more about having me be seen in a certain way. And the way that inward style finds justification is to actually be burned out. I mean, that's one of the things. And so for us to really avoid these ways of being burned out is when there's two things that come to mind. One is when I adopt a view of seeing others in terms of how they're impacting me, this self-focus, inward mindset view, I end up now feeling constraints coming from at me in various directions, because how hard is it now to just be in response to how other people are affecting me and what I'm trying to do? I mean, there's all sorts of things now that I might try to do that is stressful, invite certain kind of negative emotions. My whole entire experience is wrapped up in something that doesn't at all feel joyful or fulfilling, right? And so that's part one. Part two is, for me to avoid burnout, is for me to be able to stay active in terms of how I'm actually thinking about being in response to people around me. Meaning, am I finding ways to be able to be creative and helpful? Because that will help me not be so focused on myself and focused on my worries and my woes and how other people are doing things to me. Because quite frankly, a lot of those things that we've developed are lies to begin with. They feel like my whole entire experience because all of the negative emotions that I'm experiencing there are 100% real. However, the judgment that they're making, that other people are causing them, is 100% false. And so by being able to maintain a view of others and how I impact them, helps me unlock ways to be able to be thinking of creative solutions, to be able to actually tap into my my own ingenuity and my energies to think outside of myself. And so, Sarah, to me, there were two parts in that question, both in terms of the balance that's needed in our lives and what inward mindset doesn't mean and what it means, but then also the burnout piece. Does that help?
Now, that kind of leads to this second question, I think, really well. This question came up a lot. So you've talked a lot about how we can be outward. Well, what do we do when we are doing everything we can to be outward, but the person we're trying to be outward toward is just stubbornly inward?
Well, here, let me paint the picture this way. Let's say there's two paths that I can go down with somebody like this. Path number one is I do my trying, and they don't, in what I feel as though, change the way I feel as though they need to change, or adjust the way that I feel as though they need to adjust. Let's say that doesn't happen, even though that I tried, and I made some kind of a move, or I changed, or I really tried to be helpful in some way. And when they don't, I actually revert back to a view of them thinking, well, you know what? Even when I try so hard, even when I try to do this that's helpful to them, or even when I came even forward with an apology, they didn't even accept it. That I really have to question, did I really try? Because living in a world with others, and what outward mindset here even means, is that being with them isn't necessarily conditional, really. And if I, let's say, invest in my trying, and they don't reciprocate that, and then I just revert right back to my ways, I really have to question my try. Because did I do it to get them to change, or did I do it just because I'm actually stepping into the reality that exists around me, which is they're people who have certain challenges and difficulties. In fact, if I continue on this path, let's just say, because I want to come back to that last point I just made and the other path that I could go down. But if I now revert back and seeing them as a problem, I will now continue to invite them to be the exact person that I'm actually complaining about, who are most likely inviting me to stay just the way that I am, and we end up provoking each other and supplying with what each other needs to continue to see each other in this way, right? And along the path, we're going to gather our own allies, which means we're going to divide our communities, we're going to divide our families, and we're going to divide our workplaces in a line that is those who are with me and those who are against me, right? And so you could just imagine the consequences of that choice going down that path. But I think we really have to question the try there. But for me to step into the reality that exists around me, which is that people really are people who have certain challenges, objectives, hopes, needs, cares, fears, wants, and worries, and what have you, I can choose to see those. And I could choose to take those in account with what I'm doing. And even if, let's say, the person continues to have difficulty, I no longer see them as the problem. I actually see somebody with a problem. And seeing somebody in this way, I bet we will find that our heart breaks for them to some degree, because it's not a good place to be. Our emotional experience is spent. What we're trying to achieve is fraught with worry and challenges and pain. And for us to see that in them, hopefully our heart breaks for that. And in so doing, we don't want to pile on all the more in terms of what their experience might be like. And so on this path, it is truly really our only hope to, one, just get connected to the reality that exists all around us, that we're surrounded by people, and that people don't necessarily put us in an inward mindset. I actually accept invitations. I accept other people's invitations to jump in there myself, and then they become my perfect excuse to do less than my best, right? And we'll grab onto that sometimes when that doesn't have to be the way. It doesn't have to be the way at home. It certainly doesn't have to be the way at work. And one ends up becoming way more fulfilling and way more exciting to be a part of, even when the other person doesn't change. You know, Sarah, we have time, like an analogy forming in my head almost, that imagine that we're on this boat and we're just stranded in water, but we have a sail and the ability to actually, use the wind to take us places. And we've got this person, let's say, who's not changing, and they're in a boat, and the equivalent of them not changing is that they don't realize they have a problem. So they're in this canoe outside of the boat, and they're trying to paddle to the boat, but their oar that they're paddling with is backwards. So they're not really going anywhere. And because of the current that's in the water, they're not making any kind of a progress. Well, if the rest of us are here on this boat and I'm seeing that, and let's say there's no language that exists for me to be able to point to them and tell them the kind of problem that they're experiencing at all. I can't tell them to turn their oar around and everything's going to be fixed, because that doesn't happen in life, right? However, we have to think here. If I see them as a problem, I'm now up to two choices. One, we can stay here and be bugged and bothered until they actually get here, if that time even comes, or I can abandon them altogether. An alternative of that is to see that they're struggling. They've got a problem. How in the world can we help with that? Can we turn our boat around? Can we throw them a line? Do we have something else that we can put in the water, or another boat that can go out there and maybe help them? There's a different way of seeing alternatives. Alternatives exist in an outward mindset in a different way. Whereas from an inward mindset, seeing somebody as a problem, I'm very much limited to possibilities. So, Sarah, there's a couple ways to maybe be in response to that one.
I really love that idea of question your try. So what we've talked about so far is really pretty personal, right? We're talking about a lot of individual relationships, me with a coworker or a family member, whoever that may be. But you talked a little bit in your presentation, you hit on this a little bit about scaling the outward mindset. And we had a few questions about it as well. So what does that mean as an organization? How can you grow beyond myself as an outward person and turn it into a scalable, implementable concept?
So Sarah, I guess we can see that in many organizations that want to be able to improve, there's a couple things that they can call into question. Because businesses over time, and this is even organizations in our families and communities, we've adopted certain systems and structures and policies that are in place to actually help people behave in certain ways. Now, it turns out that we as people feel as though that's interfering with, let's say, our agency, to certain degrees, and is often an invitation for us to go inward ourselves in those moments. So for organizations to be able to question the kind of incentive that they provide in the organization, like the way they think about performance management, the conversations that they have, the way they think about pay increases, what have you, there are a lot of things that organizations are doing not to be able to scale up outward mindset work practices, but to actually knock down and eliminate inward mindset invitations and activity. There's a lot of things they'd be able to call into question around that. And so to be able to think about scaling up outward mindset activity, number one, what I think of that comes to mind is that what is required of us relative to our jobs. In fact, if you look at typical onboarding processes, they are more around what the business is doing, some of the history, where people's job space is going to be, making sure they've got their IT stuff all set up, and they also know, all of the benefits that are a part of the organization. They get a chance to see where certain resources are, and then they've got this job description that is really a series of objectives and tasks. And right out of the gate, they're really informed to excel right there. And look, people are super excited about that. But often what happens is they get in their role, they start doing work, and lo and behold, whether it be a customer or a vendor or somebody else from within the organization, doesn't make things easy for them. And so they have to adjust their work in being in response to how other people are affecting them. They do that once. That happens again. They do that again. And pretty soon, somebody who was once really excited about their work now has ended up organizing themselves and seeing their work in a way in which it's formulated really in how other people are impacting them. And that might not be every single direction. That might be one or two directions of their work. But in the very way people conceive of their work informs them of how to execute it. And so to even call into question the way that we're inviting people to both be onboarded into our organization, but also then how we're thinking about helping them be accountable for the kind of performance we want within the organization and in their role specifically. Are we inviting them not to just think about what they do, but also for the impact of what it is that they're doing? Are we orienting them to the people that their work directly affects and giving them space and leverage to be able to understand how those people's roles are ebbing and flowing and changes within certain circumstances and industry trends, and then to be able to have the freedom to adjust what they're doing, to be able to deliver the right kind of helpfulness in their role, right? That is key. However, there's something else. Now look, this might come as more of a philosophical underpinning of another way just to think about what's readily available to us to be able to scale outward mindset in the organization, is that to be outward means that I actually see those around me rather than resist them. And because of that, I'm surrounded by people, whether that be through a virtual platform like this, or whether that just be in person, or whether that just be people who are in my mind, given who my work affects or what it is that I'm doing impacts certain people. We are given the gift to be in relationship to others. And it seems to me if we rely on that as our way to be able to think about how we can be outward, then we are constantly flooded with opportunity, aren't we? That's my thought maybe on that one, Sarah.
So as somebody who's going to be watching this presentation, listening to this awesome commentary, what's something I could do? What's a quick win that somebody can turn this off and say, all right, I'm going to go do this right now?
Yeah, so when we think about a quick win, individually there's a quick win, but yet the quick wins that I love to think of is they actually encompass quite a few people. Like how can we get a whole team to be thinking about getting a quick win? And so here's maybe something to jot down that you can take back to your team immediately to be able to do. And so with your team, and again, whether this be in a virtual setting or whether this be in an in-person setting, gather your team together and invite them to locate the various groups and individuals that they collectively as a team directly affect. Who are those customer groups? Who are their colleague groups and teams? Anybody else in the organization relative to suppliers or vendors or whatever that is. Get them just to list all of those groups or individuals that their work directly affects. And then once they're there, invite the group to look at those and ponder which ones on that list do they feel as though they could be better towards, or they're just not thinking about, or it's rocky actually working with them right now. And then once they've identified that, go have that either circle that in your mind's eye or even on a whiteboard. And then with that group or individual in mind, invite the team to consider what that group or team is trying to achieve. What are they working on? What challenges do they face? What's going on in their space right now? Okay, and get them working through that. And then after that's completed, invite the team to think about, is there anything that we collectively as a team have done that is getting in the way of what they're trying to achieve, or is maybe even piling some issues on for them, or we've actually in some ways abandoned them a little bit. We haven't been thinking about them. We've kind of given up on them in some ways. What is that? So invite the team to be thinking about, is there anything, either big or small, that we've done to actually get in the way of what it is that they're trying to achieve? And then after you've done that work, invite the group now to ponder, what is it that we can do as a team to adjust what we're doing, or to actually just do something that we know would be a lot more helpful to them? And then they would write down, they would be doing some work. In fact, here I would invite you to invite them to just brainstorm a bunch of ideas. Because if they brainstorm a bunch of ideas, you can look back and think, okay, out of this list, what are some of the things that we would commit to do? And then they've got ownership. Because think, you've now invited them to see their impact on other teams in a certain way. They've been able to self-assess how they haven't been helpful in the past. They've now been able to come up in ways in which that they could potentially be doing certain things and find different kind of solutions relative to impact with this group. And then lastly, they're the ones who actually commit to be doing something. And then you take a couple of your team members to some of the senior team members of that other group or team, or maybe even just that individual, or perhaps even the customer group. And you could simply go to them and say, look, we've been thinking about you. We know that you've been trying to achieve this and you're up against these various things. And we feel as though in the past, maybe we haven't been helpful in this way, or we've gotten in your way of this way, or you know what, we actually even haven't been thinking about you much during this project. And so with that, we've actually felt if we did more of X and Y rather than Z, that might be helpful to you. Would it be? And I guarantee you that you are going to simply have the team be more aligned with a different kind of impact. Okay. Sarah, that's one quick win.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, for answering a few of these pressing questions. As always, it is absolutely a pleasure to learn from you. I know I learn a lot from myself, and I'm sure that everybody listening is just taking rapid notes, and I hope that they'll take these things away and start to implement them today. Thanks again. It's good to see you, Mike.